My thoughts is that if you have less resistance to everything, but mostly yourself, right? Mostly like your own reality, then you have less resistance to everybody else.
Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm your host, Rachel Astarte. Today, my guest is Laure Porché. She is an international listener, a weaver of live threads, and a seer of hard truths. She works with family constellations, the inner child, somatic presence, and subconscious excavation to help her clients become fully present to themselves and to their lives. So welcome, Laure.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
It's absolutely my pleasure. So, full disclosure, Laure and I work together in a beautiful think tank for marketing called Marketing for Hippies, which is hosted by Tad Hargrave. If you guys don't know him, please do check him out. And I had the wonderful benefit of working with her in a collaborative sense. And so that's how we came to know each other and how I got to have her on this podcast. So I feel very blessed to have that connection. And I'm super excited to talk about your work and what you do. So tell us a little bit, if you would, about how you got into your field and or what was your calling to do this work?
It depends which field you're talking about. If it's the field of therapy, I'd say my mom was a therapist, so I kind of fell in when I was a kid. My bedroom was my mom's waiting room while I was in it. So just there.
We could just unpack that for the next hour.
Yeah, it was just like this is kind of like
I'm sitting here, the therapist to me. Okay.
Yeah. This is the beginning.
Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
So I was literally discussing her clients with my mom from a very young age, which is not very ethical when you think about it. But other than that, more than that, I always had this kind of laser vision for what were the true underpinnings of a situation or a person. Ever since I was as long as I can remember. And so those two things combined, plus some attachment, trauma and stuff, made me a very, very good helper. And I did it unofficially for years. Not before I worked on myself, because I've been working on myself since I was 12. But at some point, pretty much simultaneously with me changing career and becoming a therapist, I also was resolving that role of helper, savior, etc. So which was a good timing, I think, because I don't think you should be a therapist if you're stuck in that.
Yeah.
And so that's how I came to it. But actually, I knew very young. I can't even say that it's something that I chose necessarily. It was kind of obvious from a very young age. I thought, of course, I'm going to be a therapist because that's what I do best, right?
Right.
And I thought I was too young until, my 30s. And so I went into performing and being an actress and a dancer and other things that I wanted to do. Thinking, well, when I get old enough, not in age, but in life lived,
right,
then I'll transition. And that's what happened, basically.
Yeah. So in the intro, we talked a little bit, or I mentioned, family constellations and somatic presence and inner child work. What is it that drew you to that path, that part of the path in particular, as opposed to cognitive behavioral therapy?
it's hard to explain because it was really, my life has kind of been defined by who I was drawn to in general, not just in therapy, but I put a lot of importance in who I spend time with and my teachers. It's more important for me than what they teach. I will see someone and I will feel, oh, I really need to be in that person's field for a little bit.
Wow. Okay.
It didn't used to be as conscious as this. Now it's quite conscious. Usually I can be like, oh, wow, yeah, I can see this person. Really, it would benefit me to learn what she has, what they have. And that's what happened for family constellation. Because originally I thought about studying kinesiology because that's what my mom used to do. And I had practiced as a client for a long time and I liked it. I thought it was good. But it was very technical and so not very attractive to me. And then I read my teacher's book, Francesca Mason Boring, wrote a book called Connecting to Your Ancestral Past. And I read it for myself, for my own work that I was doing with my family. And after a couple of chapters, I thought it's imperative that I spend time with this person. And so I did. She happened to have a training that year, and I happened to live in the US at the time. And so I signed up for a family constellation, but I didn't really care about family constellations, to be honest. I just thought that I really need to see this person, how she interacts with other humans.
Yeah.
And I happen to love constellation and to, have a sense for it. And it made sense to me from the start. And then inner child work was for my own, that's because it was the most efficient for me. I get the work that I use and the work that I do is usually because it's been very efficient for me as a client.
Yeah.
And so, because I've tried so many things, because I've been doing this since I was 11 or 12. Yeah. And so I've been to see dozens of therapists with different techniques, and all of them were good and all of them were useful. But some of them I felt were really true, like went truly to the heart of the matter. And when I started doing inner child work, it wasn't yet mainstream. Now it's crazy mainstream. Like everybody talks about it. Like you have to parent your inner child. But at the time, and it was not so long ago,
right?
Nobody was talking about it.
Right.
And for me, I had been taught that by another practitioner. And I thought it was the most amazing work that I'd done.
Yeah, it is extremely powerful work. And I find it because I work with inner child reconnection, reparenting as well. And it's amazing to me. I don't know how you feel about this, but that it really does bring the power back to the client, because sometimes when we're suffering, we feel like it's the stuff out there that we have to kind of work with. And that can be very disempowering to feel like, where am I going to find the tools to deal with this thing that feels so personal? And then the inner child work is more along the lines of, oh, it's all here.
Yeah.
And very intimate. Yeah. Have you found that to be the case?
I found that, yeah. I mean, I kind of always had that notion of, it's in me. And also because kinesiology, you work with your own body, emotional memory. I always had this very strong awareness of the body, like the real problem is not what's around, it's the body's reaction to what's around.
Yes.
Yeah. What I really like about inner child work is that it's, as you say, it's extremely empowering. And as a therapist, it's a really good transitioning tool to not stay too long in the client, putting you into the place of a parent.
Yeah, that whole transference.
Because I'm not really interested in that base. I mean, right. It's valuable. I've gotten value from it from my own therapists, but mostly because I was very aware of it. And so I could kind of, take that when somebody, a helper for me, would step in as a parent. I could kind of lean into it and be like, oh, this is really nice. But because I was aware of it, I could lean out and be like, okay, I know I need to, I need to live my whole life.
Yes.
But a lot of people who are vulnerable and they're just starting to work and they haven't like been raised in an environment where all those things are, common language.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily aware of that. And so they'll just lean into it and they just stay there. And as a therapist, I'm not really interested in staying in that role.
Yeah,
and
it's actually unethical to stay in that role.
Yeah, it's unethical, but it's actually like a lot of therapists do
it.
I
know.
And it's unethical or not. Like, it's just like some therapists have way more capacity to stay in there very long as the client need. I don't have that capacity. Like, I see other people work with people for years, and I'm like, wow, I cannot do that. It's just not me. And so I find that the state technique of the inner child work allows you to really accompany the person in holding their own hand.
Yes.
To still be there as a secure reference and as a presence and as an adult, accompaniment, which we all need as human beings.
Yeah.
And allows the person to have both, like to have that feeling of being accompanied, being secure, but also to hold themselves, which I find very important in any sort of self-work.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is a great transition to the next question. It's a big one, but I think you can handle it. What is the self to you? What is that? When I say that word, what comes up for you?
This is a big question. I guess the thing is that there are different answers depending on the context that you're referring to. If you're referring to a spiritual context, the answer is going to be different than from an egoic context or even therapeutic context. And the self, when you say the self, do you mean the identity? Do you mean the essence? Do you mean the soul? Do you mean the body?
What my answer is.
Body knowledge, like all of that.
Yes.
Yes.
So yes, and maybe by listing them, you're kind of answering the question. But yes, there's a multifaceted self for sure, and I think that really does kind of answer the question. There are so many elements that we work with that comprise the self. Maybe if we hone the question a little bit, or the term, when I say something like, when we talk about self-work, what's that work heading toward when we say self-work? How do we know when self-work, we don't want to say done because we're constantly learning and growing, but how do we know we're on a self-work path? What's going on?
To me, it feels like choice. Like it's a felt sense. Again, you can't, as you say, you can't ever say, "Oh, I'm done." Like, I don't. It doesn't exist to all listeners out there.
And it would be boring if it did stop.
Yeah, it's not a thing. But choice, in the sense of, that's kind of always my question with anything, is where's my choice? Do I have a choice? And when I don't have a choice and I'm just starting to do that actually. And when I say I don't have a choice, it doesn't mean like I don't have a choice that I like. It means I don't have a choice in the sense I don't have the capacity right now to react any differently. I'm more and more, becoming aware of that, and like letting myself have that, like letting myself have all the feelings that come with not having a choice. But yeah, for me, it's radical self-acceptance, radical responsibility, and radical compassion. I guess that's what self-work is going towards.
Yeah. And to take that a step further, once we are on that path of this acceptance and compassion, then where does that lead us? Now I'm sort of nudging it toward community, or how do we show up in the world? What are your thoughts about that? Hi, it's Rachel here. If you'd like to dive deeper into your own self-development, but you're looking for an alternative to traditional talk therapy, I think you'll love the Foundation of Self Immersion program. For a full year, you'll get dynamic coursework you can complete on your own time, plus weekly coaching calls and monthly one-on-one sessions with me for personal support. Visit foundationofself.com and click on the events page for more information. That's foundationofself.com. Now, back to the episode.
My thoughts is that if you have less resistance to everything, but mostly yourself, right? Mostly like your own reality, then you have less resistance to everybody else reality. The only reason why we resist other people, or we demonize other people, or we feel invaded, or we feel like we don't have enough capacity, or we feel like we're always doing everything for everybody, and that nobody is doing everything for us. And for me, that all comes from really a difficulty to be with oneself fully, and to take fully responsibility for yourself. Like if you take full responsibility for yourself, then there's no reason to be in resistance to the world, for one. And if you get used to your pain, like if you go through the process of sitting with your own despair, in a way, right, and your own grief, and you stop trying to avoid it, and you just acknowledge that it's there, and let it exist, let it happen, let it express itself, have radical self-compassion, then you have way less resistance towards anything in the world that might trigger your grief, your anger, your anything, because you're not afraid of it. You don't mind, like you don't like, and I'm not saying it's pleasant,
right?
Like, let's not confuse things,
Right.
I'm constantly working on my capacity for grief, because my heart is one of the reasons why it's so hard for me to live from my heart is because if I go to my heart, I will grieve every single thing that I see around me, right? There's so much pain everywhere. There's so much loss.
Yeah.
And I'm very aware of it. Some people are not, they're less connected, but I was very connected to it from very young. And I think we all are, right? And we just get disconnected from it as a survival mechanism.
Sure. Yeah.
But part of it is, okay, the more that I open to my own grief, and the more I can actually participate in the world, because I'm not protecting myself all the time against feeling what I would feel if I was open and participating and present to other people. And so I think when as you work on yourself, you have more and more capacity, and you become more and more able to be fully present and open and available, and fluid, like not rigid in the way that you interact with other people, with living things, with your environment, with authority, society, like all of those things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you touched on a very important point, which is the capacity for grief.
Yeah.
Stephen Jenkinson says it's a skill.
Yeah.
Grief is a skill.
Yeah.
And that's really something that we need to practice throughout our lives.
Yeah.
But I appreciate what you're saying as well, is people talk all the time about, oh, this triggered me, this activated me, this, and to be able to have that grounded sense of self to include and honor all the ups and downs, all the dark and light in all of us, then kind of turns down the volume on the triggering. To add to it, I think you did touch on it, but I want to emphasize for the listeners that this is what compassion is about, that we're all going through whatever we're going through in our lives. And so if someone has activated something in you, to me, that's a beautiful gift, because that means, oh, now I know exactly what I need to work on,
Yeah, that's what I also always tell to my clients, and they hate me. I say, like,
maybe it's your delivery.
What a great what a great opportunity, and they just look at me like, and they know it's true.
Yeah.
What people don't understand about this is that it doesn't make it less painful.
Yes. Yes.
Precisely. There's this misconception or misunderstanding or expectation that if I have consciousness, if I'm aware of things, and if I'm intentional about things, then I will suffer less.
Mm-hmm.
That is not true. No. You can be completely aware, okay, this relationship with the situation is a great opportunity for me to work on my shit. And it's going to be just as painful.
Yeah.
Just as painful. Nothing will be, taken away from it. Mm-hmm. You might stay less time in the pain if you are fully present with it, than if you're trying to be like, well, this is the other person's fault and they've triggered me, and now I'm this, poor thing that has completely innocent in the situation.
Right.
But the pain is the same.
I want to go back to just something you said that I think is so important. What is it that you think about that you said you may not stay in the pain as long if you have that kind of awareness? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, in my experience, what makes the pain stay longer is to refuse it. Or to try to push it onto somebody else, it's just like, or, this is their fault and they should handle it and they should make it better, etc. And then you stay in that. You can stay in that for years, really,
Sure.
And hours if it's a smaller thing. Whereas if you just let it be as it is without having judgment on it, just letting it come out of you, like come through you, usually it resolves itself, right? It's emotions have a 90-second loop in the body. It's like an emotion cycle is 90 seconds. If you let it, if you don't interfere, you don't try to push it down, to hold it back, whatever. If you let it just move through you, it's a 90-second cycle. If you have a lot of backlog, that's another story, because the moment that you open for 90 seconds, then all the other 90 seconds that you haven't opened for, you're just going to be right on, on the back of that. But if you get into a practice of just being letting things move through you, at some point your backlog starts diminishing, right?
Right.
And even if you have something that's really difficult, like a tragedy or something, there's still 90 seconds loops, and there might be a lot of them, but every 90 seconds you have a chance to get out of it if you want, if you want to go and do something else.
Right.
You don't have to stay stuck in it. Usually when you stay stuck in it, it's because you don't want to feel it.
That's right. And that's the thing too. So we are programmed to avoid discomfort.
Yeah.
And what we don't realize when we do this really deep self-work is that, yes, there's discomfort. As you're saying, yes, you're going to feel the pain. But when you're going in there armed with your awareness and non-judgment about that situation or that pain, then the emotion can regulate itself much more quickly and more efficiently.
Yeah.
Does that seem right?
That it does seem right. It also depends on your level of trauma and, like the state of your body, I guess.
Yeah, let's talk about the body for a second. Let's talk about the somatic aspect of it for a second. You gotta no, but give us an overview of how the body works, as you know, what the body's part is in this work.
I mean, it's everything. It's all of it.
And we forget that, don't we?
We forget that. Yeah, because we want to control, like we think that because our mind thinks that it's actually ruling the show.
Right.
Not our mind, it's our body who's ruling the show. Mm-hmm. I'm working right now with a teacher whose name is Perry Chase, who's a really interesting person. And a lot of her work is about teaching you or almost training you to stay in your body no matter the situation and the intensity.
Wow.
And I think that's amazing work. I think honestly she does amazing work. And it's a simple approach, but it's actually I think the one that works the best. Mm-hmm. And it will be different for different people, depending on the level of dysregulation, and the level of trauma that you've had, right, as a child. But I do think that most of it hinges on the nervous system and the body, and which is why it's so frustrating, right? Because we don't always have control over that. And it's so frustrating for people when they understand, they see why they're reacting that way, et cetera, but they don't have control over the reaction because the reaction is physical, it's somatic. Mm-hmm. And it's literally the body is reacting without their consent. So I do think that most of this work is somatic, is how are you going to learn slowly, like and that's what's difficult as well, is like it's a really slow work, because it's like re-education, re-educating your nervous system very slowly. Yeah. And that's what's frustrating for people, because sometimes, it takes a lot of consistency and a lot of time. And in our society, I think human beings in general, like time and consistency, not great. But in this society, with the speed of information, we've lost even our sense of it, of what it is to be slow and consistent. And also our nervous system is completely hijacked by screens all the time. I'm not a specialist of that. That people like Irene Lyon that you can go to that do really deep, in-depth work about the nervous system to re-educate it from scratch, basically, so that you can relearn to stay in your body and feel intensity and not go into freeze, not go into fight or flight, just feel it. And yeah, I think that's capital. Whatever work you're doing, there's the whole part that's about awareness. It's about like understanding, like seeing your pain, accepting it, like seeing the roots and the whatever, and the work that you have to do to accept your parents and all of that. Like that's all more of a, conceptual and mental, and it is somatic. Like it has a lot of somatic influence. But then there's the whole other part that's really body centric. Okay, how am I, like, how can I feel myself and not freak out, basically? Yeah. How can I feel myself and not freak out?
Right. And then there's the question of who is the I, right? So the body is the I, the spirit is the I, the mind is the I, and that's all working together. Right. So
yeah, and you can have very strong somatic responses to things that are not body centric. Like I'm thinking, for instance, I'm coming out of functional freeze the last few years. Let's say that I've been in freeze, especially in terms of relationships. Okay. I wasn't aware of it. I was a therapist. I was all the things. Wasn't aware of it. So I'm slowly coming out, and so obviously, like lots of stuff are getting triggered. And it's very slow work. Yeah. But you can have very intense somatic responses. For instance, I do art therapy with a friend. So it's drawing. technically, you wouldn't think, you'd say like, this is not really body centric. It works on
Of course it
subconscious
is.
and stuff,
Yeah.
but it's not, you're not focused on your nervous system and sensations.
Right.
But for me, it's extremely somatic. Both when
Mm.
I'm doing it, I can feel like the movement, the flow of trauma, the things that are moving are leaving my system are coming in. But also when I look at my drawings, usually, I remember the first time I went to see her, had done like an abstract drawing, and she put it on the wall. She said, "Do you mind if I turn it around?" And she turned it around, and I thought I was going to fall off my chair. How, like, so strong was the feeling of that. And so it doesn't have to be necessarily, like directly.
Yeah.
And I've had constellations famously somatic, even though the focus is not somatic. But I've had constellation done where I could feel like the somatic response was incredible. I could feel like blocks reorganizing in my body as I was watching the thing unfold. And sometimes I didn't even know what I was watching. I was just watching it. I didn't understand what was going on.
Yeah.
But my body was reorganizing information.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. So as a final question for today, given all of what we talked about, and maybe there's another subject you want to interject here, what is a way of thinking or being that you wish human beings held as innate knowledge? In other words, what do you think what would be helpful for human beings to just be born with as a thought or
well, the problem is like we are born with everything. We just lose it.
Okay, then maybe to have it be conscious.
It's a good question. Like an awareness, you'd say.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of will, in a way, just bringing it back to my work or to my other work. I'd say the awareness of mirror in the environment, like the awareness of metaphor. I think that's extremely helpful, like to constantly be aware of what your environment is presenting you. And situation, images, metaphors, and take it as information about yourself.
Beautiful.
Because it is.
Right. Because it's all
really
connected.
is. If you look around you and you start really paying attention to everything that's going on, and all the metaphors that are happening all the time, not necessarily trying to understand them, but because as soon as you grab something with the mind, it kind of loses its power.
Right.
But to really let them in, like take them in, and let them give you a felt sense of what is working in your system, so that you can support it, you can kind of accompany it. That would be great if people have awareness, instead of doing, because they're doing it, but they're doing it in a projective way. But like, they're projecting on everything around what's going on inside them, when actually everything around is showing them what's going on.
Right. Just change the direction of the connection. I love it. Yeah. Love that. And you know what? And you brought up a really good point, which is we all have this capability innately, but it's the awareness part. So to be aware of the fact that we are in communication with everything around us all the time. Yeah. Beautiful. So how can listeners find you, Laure?
Many places. So
let's just say online. I'm at the local coffee shop.
Yeah, you can find me online. I have a website. It's laureporché.com. I'm on Instagram, Laure Porché, all one word. And sometime this year, I have a podcast that you were a guest on, called the Moonlit Path Podcast. And this year, I will most likely open a membership, also called the Silken Mirror. which will be exactly that. We'll be working on subconscious through metaphor and experiences, and looking for the truth behind our patterns, I guess.
Oh, beautiful. I love it. I look forward to that. So, Laure Porché, thank you so much for being with us on Self Talk.
It's Rachel. So good to be here.
Hi, this is Rachel Astarte from the Self Talk podcast. I'd love for you to send me your emails with questions or stories about yourself. What are you looking for? What are your questions? What are you grappling with in your own personal life that has to do with your identity, with yourself, with your very existence? These are the things that we're going to talk about during the podcast. And go ahead. It's all right. Get deep. I can handle it. So send them to Rachel@selftalkpodcast.com, and I'll see you on the next episode.